Well, it's unthinkable to think that they could be the source of the leaked emails that cost Debbie Wasserman Schultz her job. I can't imagine the NSA feeding Julian Assange this information. Could you?
Yes, and that's exactly.
You think they would actually use that outlaw, that criminal?
That is exactly what Bill Binney is saying. And
we would never do that.
You say that you play straight up, but I have to ask you because you were accused of receiving a debate question before a CNN town hall where they partnered with TV One, and that you had this question on March 12th. That verbatim was provided by Roland Martin to CNN the next day. How did you get that question, Donna?
Well, Kelly, since I play straight up, and I'll play straight up with you, I did not receive any questions from CNN. Let's just be very clear.
Where did you get it?
First of all, what information are you providing to me that will allow me to see what you're talking about? Everybody
you got the WikiLeaks released on March 12th Podesta email showing you messaging the Clinton campaign with the exact wording of a question asked at the March 13th CNN TV One town hall debate. Where did you get it?
You know, as a Christian woman, I understand persecution, but I will not sit here and be persecuted because your information is totally false. What you're telling the American people, well, Podesta's emails were stolen. You're so interested in talking about stolen
material. So you
deny it. You're like a thief that want to bring into the night the things that you found that was in the gutter. I'm not. Let me just tell you what I said from day one.
CNN's Jake Tapper came out and said this was unethical. Somebody was unethically helping the Clinton campaign. He said, "I love Donna Brazile, but this is very, very upsetting." My understanding is that the email to Donna Brazile. This is Jake Tapper. My understanding is that the email to Donna Brazile came from either Roland Martin or someone around Roland Martin. He said this is very upsetting and very troubling. That's your own colleague at CNN. It's not Megyn Kelly. Who gave you that question?
Hey, Megyn, once again, I've said it, and I've said it on the record, and I'll say it on the record, and I'll keep saying it on the record. I am not going to try to validate falsified information. I have my documents. I have my files. Thank God I have not had my personal emails ripped off from me and stolen and given to some criminals to come back altered. I have my records, I have my files, and as I've said repeatedly, CNN, in the 14 years I was associated with CNN, I've never received anything. If I had a blank piece of paper, that would basically be the end of this conversation. I never get documents from CNN.
Your email to the Clinton camp said, sometimes I receive the questions in advance. And CNN is saying Roland Martin to you or someone at TV One, and they were provided to Hillary before that town hall.
Well, anybody who knows me, and there are a number of your colleagues as well, they know me very well. I know how I play it. I know what I do before every debate. I know what I do before every show, even this show. I do my homework. I communicate. I talk. But I can just once again let you know that as far as I know, that CNN has never provided me with questions. Absolutely, ever. Nada.
Well, when you said from time to time I get the questions in advance, what were you referring to? Because in that email you offered the exact question that one of the moderators, Roland Martin, then proposed the next day.
So my reference back to you, ma'am, with all respect, and I respect you greatly.
And I respect you too.
The validity of those emails, if I can only tell you one thing, because as you know, this whole episode is under criminal investigation, but I could just tell you one thing. A lot of those emails, I would not give them the time of the day. I've seen so many doctored emails. I've seen things that come from me at 2 in the morning that I don't even send. There are several email addresses that I appreciate that, and they haven't all been verified. I'm so sorry that we've...
Judge Andrew Napolitano to talk about all sorts of things. Judge, you know Bill Binney, William Binney, former NSA official, the architect of the NSA surveillance program.
Yes.
He says that the person, as it turns out, despite what the DNC and Democrats are saying, it was not Russia that hacked the DNC. It was perhaps it was somebody from the NSA who is angry about the fact that she was using personal email server, which violated what is called gamma material, which is the most sensitive at the NSA. Do you believe that?
I do believe it, and one of the reasons that there is so much anxiety, it's very interesting, and it's probably going to become an issue in the campaign. One of the reasons there is so much anxiety about Mrs. Clinton from the intelligence community is the belief that some of the materials that she handled with such extreme carelessness, I'm using Jim Comey's phrase, in my opinion it was criminal, but in the FBI director's opinion it was extreme carelessness, contained the names of American undercover intelligence agents, some of whom are no longer with us. This is the belief of a lot of people in the intelligence community. If Mrs. Clinton does become president of the United States, she's going to have a lot of antipathy towards her by people in the intelligence community. This is the tip of the iceberg.
That wasn't in the report that people might have died because names were listed and sent, right?
Correct. The FBI did not reveal that. The FBI never revealed the contents, and quite properly, because it's still classified.
Sure.
The FBI never revealed the contents of the 25 top secret, of which 5 were SAP, meaning even FBI agents didn't have the clearance to reveal them. So Bill Binney is saying of the 60,000 NSA agents and contractors, there's a critical mass who fear Mrs. Clinton's presidency and more likely than not hacked into the DNC
so the
and
NSA
leaked
has
this.
got him.
So this is
According to them.
this is a man you know well, Judge,
Yes.
and he recently did a radio interview where he explained essentially that. Listen.
If you had to just estimate here as an analyst who your best guess, what would be your best guess for who the hacker is, who Lucifer 2 is?
In this situation, I was thinking about how many other people have this data and hacked into the DNC. Well, as hacking into Hillary's server at home. I go back to a statement made by Director Mueller of the FBI back in 30th of March of 2011, and he said he got together with the Department of Defense and they created a technology database where he, as a member of the FBI, could go in with one query and get all past emails and all future ones as they came in on a person. Now, what he's talking about is going into the NSA database. So that means that NSA and a number of other agencies in the U.S. government also have those emails.
So what he's saying is there's this NSA database, and unbeknownst to us, because there's no oversight, the FBI, the CIA has access to it. Comey could have looked at Hillary's email if they had him, but then he'd open a whole can of worms.
Right. Then he would be revealing that the NSA, in fact, does have everybody's emails, which
and
a lot of us,
be a secret.
right, which a lot of us believe, which Bill Binney, a former NSA official who developed the software that the NSA uses, says they have, but which the NSA has never officially acknowledged.
Julian Assange was on another show yesterday and says they got a lot more damning Hillary Clinton campaign emails coming out.
Okay, this again is going to become a campaign issue because WikiLeaks and Julian Assange blame Mrs. Clinton for the fact that he is in exile in the basement of the Ecuadorian embassy in London. They also condemn Mrs. Clinton's secrecy and they want to reveal what they have. And Brian, I know you don't like this guy, but every time they have promised a data dump, they have delivered. Yes.
So thinking that there could be an October surprise, that is not inconceivable.
It is not inconceivable that they know exactly when. Look at what they did to Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Absolutely.
They know exactly the perfect timing to release these materials.
You are very clearly quoting from WikiLeaks, and what's really important about WikiLeaks is that the Russian government has engaged in espionage against Americans. They have hacked American websites, American accounts of private people, of institutions. Then they have given that information to WikiLeaks for the purpose of putting it on the internet. This has come from the highest levels of the Russian government, clearly from Putin himself, in an effort, as 17 of our intelligence agencies have confirmed, to influence our election. So I actually think the most important question of this evening, Chris, is finally, will Donald Trump admit and condemn that the Russians are doing this and make it clear that he will not have the help of Putin in this election?
The emails, which were exposed by WikiLeaks, revealed a very strong bias on the part of high officials in the Democratic Party for the candidacy of Hillary Clinton. and a very strong prejudice on the part of the same people towards the candidacy of Bernie Sanders, even though such bias and prejudice had been alleged by Sanders and denied by the Democratic National Committee. It even resulted in the resignation of the chair of the committee as a result of a unanimous request from the members of the committee and the intervention of President Obama himself. But in order to get this issue off the front page, the DNC and the Clinton campaign decided to blame, of all people, the Russians. They accused Vladimir Putin of being in cahoots with Donald Trump and having his intelligence services hack the DNC to expose emails to make Mrs. Clinton look bad and thereby benefit Donald Trump. But the Russians had nothing to do with it, because this week, a 30-year veteran of the National Security Administration, the NSA, the domestic spies who spy on all of us all the time, the former high-ranking NSA official who developed the software that the NSA now uses, which allows it to capture not just metadata, but content of every telephone call, text message, email in the United States of every person in the United States of America. This individual said, guess what? The NSA hacked the Democratic National Committee. Why would the NSA hack the DNC? Because the members of the intelligence community simply do not want Hillary Clinton to be president of the United States, because she doesn't know how to handle state secrets. Because some of the state secrets that she revealed use the proper true names of American intelligence agents operating undercover in the Middle East. When they lost their covers, they ran for their lives, and some of them didn't run fast enough and lost their lives. It's very telling that the intelligence community would feel so strongly about Mrs. Clinton that they would attempt to sabotage her campaign to prevent her from becoming their boss. It's also telling that these folks would break American law in order to, in their view, save it. Welcome to my chambers.
Does the government work for us, or do we work for the government? Tonight, what if the Constitution no longer applied? What if the whole purpose of the Constitution was to limit the government? What if Congress's enumerated powers in the Constitution no longer limited Congress, but were actually used as a justification to extend Congress's authority over every realm of human life? What if the president, meant to be an equal to Congress, has instead become a democratically elected, term-limited monarch? What if the president assumed that everything he did was legal just because he's the president? What if he could interrupt your regularly scheduled radio and TV programming for a special message from him? What if he could declare war on his own? What if he could read your emails and your texts without a search warrant? What if he could kill you without warning? What if Supreme Court justices no longer looked to the Constitution to determine the constitutionality of a law, but rather simply to what justices who preceded them thought about it? What if the rights and principles guaranteed in the Constitution have been so distorted in the past 200 years as to be unrecognizable by the founders? What if the 50 states were no longer sovereign entities, equals to each other, and parents of the federal government they voluntarily constituted? What if the states were mere provinces of a totally nationalized and fully centralized government? What if the Constitution was amended stealthily, not by constitutional amendments duly ratified by the states, but by the constant and persistent expansion of the federal government's role in our lives? What if the federal government decided if its own powers were proper and constitutional? What if the Constitution were no longer the supreme law of the land? What if you needed a license from the government to speak, to assemble, or to protest against the government? What if the government didn't like what you planned to say, and so it didn't give you the license? What if the right to keep and bear arms only applied to the government? What if posse comitatus, the federal law that prohibits our military from occupying our streets, were no longer in effect? What if the government considered the military an adequate dispenser of domestic law enforcement? What if cops looked and acted like troops and you couldn't distinguish the military from the police? What if you were not secure in your person, in your papers, and in your property? What if federal agents could write their own search warrants in defiance of the Constitution? What if the government could decide when you were and were not entitled to a jury trial? What if the government could take your property whenever it wanted? What if the government could continue prosecuting you until it got the verdict it wanted? What if the government could force you to testify against... Does the government work for us or do we work for the government? Tonight, what if the Constitution no longer applied? What if the whole purpose of the Constitution was to limit the government? What if Congress's enumerated powers in the Constitution no longer limited Congress, but were actually used as a justification to extend Congress's authority over every realm of human life? What if the president, meant to be an equal to Congress, has instead become a democratically elected, term-limited monarch? What if the president assumed that everything he did was legal just because he's the president? What if he could interrupt your regularly scheduled radio and TV programming for a special message from him? What if he could declare war on his own? What if he could read your emails and your texts without a search warrant? What if he could kill you without warning? What if Supreme Court justices no longer looked to the Constitution to determine the constitutionality of a law, but rather simply to what justices who preceded them thought about it? What if the rights and principles guaranteed in the Constitution have been so distorted in the past 200 years as to be unrecognizable by the founders? What if the 50 states were no longer sovereign entities, equals to each other, and parents of the federal government they voluntarily constituted? What if the states were mere provinces of a totally nationalized and fully centralized government? What if the Constitution was amended stealthily, not by constitutional amendments duly ratified by the states, but by the constant and persistent expansion of the federal government's role in our lives? What if the federal government decided if its own powers were proper and constitutional? What if the Constitution were no longer the supreme law of the land? What if you needed a license from the government to speak, to assemble, or to protest against the government? What if the government didn't like what you planned to say, and so it didn't give you the license? What if the right to keep and bear arms only applied to the government? What if posse comitatus, the federal law that prohibits our military from occupying our streets, were no longer in effect? What if the government considered the military an adequate dispenser of domestic law enforcement? What if cops looked and acted like troops and you couldn't distinguish the military from the police? What if you were not secure in your person, in your papers, and in your property? What if federal agents could write their own search warrants in defiance of the Constitution? What if the government could decide when you were and were not entitled to a jury trial? What if the government could take your property whenever it wanted? What if the government could continue prosecuting you until it got the verdict it wanted? What if the government could force you to testify against yourself simply by labeling you a domestic terrorist? What if the government could torture you until you said what the government wanted to hear? What if people running for president actually supported torture? What if the government tortured your children to get to you? What if government judges and government lawyers intimidated juries into convicting the innocent? What if the government could send you to your death and your innocence meant nothing so long as the government's procedures were followed? What if America's prison population, the largest in the world, was a cruel and unusual way for a country to be free? What if half the prison population never harmed anyone but themselves? What if the people had no rights except those the government chose to let them have? What if the states had no rights except to do as the federal government commanded? What if our elected officials didn't really live among us, but instead all had their hearts and homes in Washington, D.C.? What if the government could strip you of your rights because of where your mother was when you were born? What if the income tax was unconstitutional? What if the states were convinced to give up their representation in Congress? What if the government tried to ban you from using a substance in your body that is older than the government itself? What if voting didn't mean anything anymore because both political parties stand for big government? What if the government could write any law, regulate any behavior, and tax any event? The Constitution be damned. What if the government was the reason we don't have a Constitution anymore? What if you could love your country but hate what the government has done to it? What if sometimes to love your country you had to alter or abolish the government? What if Jefferson was right? What if that government is best which governs least? What if I'm right? What if the government is wrong? What if it is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong? What if it is better to perish fighting for freedom than to live as a slave? What if freedom's greatest hour of danger is now?